I want to take some time today to talk about part of my comics journey that I feel like isn't talked about a lot, at least not in the circles that I follow and that I'm part of. Maybe it is, maybe I'm just not paying close enough attention. That's very possible. But what I want to talk about is superhero comics versus non superhero comics. Because my journey has been kind of a pendulum swinging in a bunch of different directions when it comes to my preference regarding this division in the realm of comics. So I want to talk a little bit about my journey with these different types of comics. But as always, I don't really want this video to be about me. I want it to be something that can hopefully spark a conversation amongst people. It can also maybe be a guide for those who are new to comics, or maybe people who are considering branching out and exploring new genres, or maybe people who are kind of getting tired of one genre and thinking about moving on. I want this to be for everyone, not just about myself. So as I mentioned in a previous video, I first started collecting comics around 2011, 2012, somewhere in that ballpark. And when I first started collecting these comics, I was very much focused on superhero comics, specifically DC comics, and even more specifically, Batman comics, a trend that, as you can see, has continued ever since. I really wasn't reading much else. I was, reading some other DC titles for sure, maybe a little bit of Marvel here and there, but nothing that was a non-superhero comic. And I was trying to kind of get back into my headspace back then. I'm not even sure if I knew that non-superhero comics existed. I feel like I had to have known, but I don't know, for some reason, like, that part of my memory is just missing. It felt like I was like so focused, had so much tunnel vision for superhero comics that I didn't recognize this other whole realm existed. I don't know, it doesn't matter. The point is, I wasn't reading many non-superhero comics. That was until I saw a YouTube video. And I feel so bad that I can't remember the title of this video or who made it, because it was kind of pivotal to me. But the basic idea of this video was it was a top 5, top 10 list, something like that, of the best non-superhero comics to read. And I remember watching it and hearing all of the premises and big ideas behind these stories and thinking like, wow, those sound really cool. So I wanted to check them out. The first one I checked out, I still have with me here, is Lock and Key. I remember just the general idea that you have all these keys that kind of have magical powers, living in this kind of, haunted-esque, haunted isn't the right word, but this old kind of interesting house that has a lot of things going on with it. Sounded really cool. So I picked up the first volume of the trade paperback, and it was really cool. I loved it, and I ended up collecting the rest of the series. Actually, I remember being so into the series, I read it very quickly with the collected editions, and I eventually caught up to it, and the very last few issues of the series before it wrapped up, I collected those as single issues, which was kind of cool, to have kind of caught up with the series. It was kind of like playing chase and catching up to it before it finally reached its finale, which was fantastic. I absolutely love Lock and Key. It's definitely one of my favorite non-superhero comics. And this kind of opened up the floodgates. Okay, so at this point, I know for sure that there are non-superhero comics out there, and I know that I like them. I'm still really liking the superhero comics. I'm still reading plenty of Batman and other titles, but now I know that non-superhero comics existed, and I was reading a little bit of both of them, and it was a good time. But as I mentioned in my other video, as I got older, started working, all that stuff, it became tougher and tougher to find time to read comics. And at that time as well, I started thinking a little bit more about what I was reading. And I think part of what kind of influenced my thought process about this was that some friends that I knew who also read comics, they didn't read superhero stuff. They read non-superhero comics. And they didn't look down on superhero comics at all, It's just that's not what they read. And I think even though I didn't feel judged or I didn't really feel peer pressure directly to, kind of move away from superhero comics, I think to a certain degree, I was kind of unconsciously swayed by that to maybe start focusing a little bit more on the non-superhero comic side of things. That, along with the thought that I started to feel like the superhero comics, they became kind of repetitive. They started to feel very formulaic, which, is kind of the case. I still feel that to an extent today, although I will talk about why I feel differently about that in a moment. But all of this together, I started to focus on non-superhero comics. And even though I wasn't reading many comics at all for, a good few years, they were very sparse. When I was reading them, they were non-superhero comics. I'm trying to think. I don't think I was reading anything superhero during that time. Maybe something small here and there, but I was really focused on the non-superhero stuff for a good amount of time. That was until the tail end of 2024, which is when the first trailer for James Gunn's Superman movie came out. And I remember watching this trailer, and I thought it looked fantastic. I loved the movie. But I remember watching this trailer and reading the comments. And so many people were talking about how James Gunn got Superman, how he really understood the character and was being very true to who that character should be. And it kind of hit me that I don't know if I really know Superman that well. Like, yes, I know Superman. I know his powers. I know, the origin story of him, all that good stuff. I know about his villains. But it had been a while since I had read Superman. Even when I was reading superhero comics, I didn't read as much Superman as I had read Batman. And it just kind of hit me like, Superman is like this ultra iconic character. I'm someone who likes comics. And I don't know if I really understand Superman. And that might be a little bit of an extreme statement, but the point stands that all these people who were talking about how true Gunn was being to Superman, that was a statement that I feel like I would not have been able to make confidently because I didn't know the Superman character well enough. So this inspired me to go and buy some Superman comics just to kind of read it for myself, kind of come in with a different perspective where I'm really trying to understand what the core of this character is about. Not the powers, not the origin story, just who is Superman as a person. And I really wanted to focus on that because I definitely hadn't focused on that in the past. And I liked what I read. I really liked it, and it made me appreciate Superman in a whole new way. And that was the springboard for me to get back into superhero comics. And that's what I want to take the rest of this video to talk about. I want to talk about all the other factors that kind of came together that made me really appreciate superhero comics in a new way, and how it is that nowadays I love both superhero comics and non-superhero comics. So let's start off by putting a bow on what I just said about Superman. I think that this reboot of the DC universe and seeing people talk about the Superman character and just Gunn gets it. And I know I keep coming back to that, and I know some people don't feel that way, but I read so many people talking about it so positively that it made me really want to understand Superman's person, not the powers. And I think that was a pivotal moment for me where I started to recognize superheroes are more than just their powers, more than just their origin story, more than just their rogues. They're people. And there are parts about these characters that we can relate to ourselves, either in a positive way or in a negative way. And that's something that, of course, I always knew was the case. But back when I was, reading superhero comics quite a bit, 10 years or so ago, that's not really what I was focusing on. I was focusing on, the cool stories, I was focusing on the powers, those sorts of things, which I still really like. I still think they're really cool, but I wasn't appreciating the characters as people enough. And I think that me now being a little bit older and appreciating that and being more conscious about understanding who the characters are has allowed me to appreciate superhero comics in a new way. To give another example of this, I remember playing through Marvel's Spider-Man on PlayStation. And spoilers. Okay, you've had enough time to pause or skip now if you want to. But at the end of the first game in that series, Aunt May dies. And it's because Peter basically decides to use this very small sample of an antidote that he had to create new antidote, basically to serve as kind of the kind of a starter pack, if you will. It's not sourdough bread, but you get my idea that he had this small sample of antidote. He decided to give it to the scientists so they can make more antidote instead of giving that to his aunt. But because that took some time, Aunt May died. And it really spoke to the idea of Spider-Man and responsibility, which, again, it's one of those things like I always knew it was there, but that moment in that book, that moment in that game, I should say, kind of hit home in a new way as I was getting older, where I started to recognize like that whole message about great power and great responsibility. It's pretty profound, and it's something that I think it sounds catchy. We hear it all the time. It's kind of easy just to gloss over it. But when you really take a moment to think about it, there's some pretty heavy stuff there. And those sorts of things with Spider-Man and Superman, that was kind of one of the first parts that made me start to appreciate superhero comics again. But I think the second part of this comes back to a point I brought up earlier, which is when I said that superhero comics feel kind of repetitive. They feel very formulaic. And this is where I really want to kind of give some potential advice or some ideas to people who are new to comics, which is that, yes, this is the case. If you look at any individual arc for a superhero, it gets very formulaic, it gets very repetitive. And that's definitely something to be mindful of. When you're first getting into comics, I think that's fine. When you're first starting to figure out a character, learn about their mythos, all that sort of thing, yeah, just jump around, find different stories that you like about them. That's a great way to get into comics, I think. I think it's totally valid. But as I said, after a while, that does become repetitive. And as I came back to superhero comics, I started to recognize that I wanted to focus less on these individual, discrete stories that we see from superheroes. And I really want to start understanding their larger arc pretty much through their entire history. I wanted to understand the big picture of the DC universe. How do all these different crisis events fit in? How did the Bat family turn out the way that it is today? Things that I sort of kind of knew, but I had never really read through all of the source material for it. And that's a project I'm still working on now. You can see that I'm starting to put together, or I'm starting to collect omnibuses, partly because I no longer want to read these just single individual stories. I want to read all of them connected together. And I want to see how that forms this big picture. That, yes, any individual part does become a little bit repetitive, but when you zoom out a little bit and you start looking at the big picture and you start seeing all these different characters that come and go and change, you start to appreciate these comics in a different way. I really hope that made sense. What I'm trying to say is that once you're kind of familiar with a character and what they are, reading those individual stories isn't the most fulfilling thing, but if you really start diving into that character and start going through their entire history and really understanding how they came to be who they are today, and then look ahead to who they're going to be tomorrow, that is, to me, very satisfying and overcomes some of that repetitiveness that drove me away from superhero comics in the first place. So, there you have it. Those are some of my thoughts about superhero comics versus non-superhero comics. Boy, do I feel like I've been rambling for a while. I kind of have, but I hope there are some nuggets in there that either spark conversation, which I would love to see in the comments, and I hope there are also some nuggets that help you if you are new to comics, or if you're kind of where I was and thinking about moving away from superhero comics. I hope that maybe I gave some ideas that can help you make that decision. So I think that's all I really have, and yeah, I'll see you next time.